What's going on there, folks? Good afternoon, good morning to a few out there. It's the Earthmaster here, back on this finally Friday. It is the start of the weekend out here. January 20th is the date, 2023, about 11:46 a.m. here along the west coast, where the latest earthquake shows a 0.9 down into the region of Southern California. We have seen some activity up there in Northern California once again overnight with a 4.2. And also a somewhat of a large earthquake over here, 6.2 around the Caribbean plate. Taking a look at the latest activity here across the area, shows that 6.2 earthquake coming in about 3 in the morning, just outside of the St. John's area, Barbuda region, 166 kilometers deep. Now this is a major subduction zone area, and has seen some rather large quakes historically. I went ahead and pulled up the historical data on this area as far as earthquake activity goes. And of course, the latest one on the top of the chart there was 6.2 in the blue circle. Looks like it's been a couple years since about 2016 since we've seen somewhat of a similar large earthquake in that region. We did have a 7.4 back in 2007. And as you can see on the list here, quite a few 6s and 7s. But as we go down here, the furthest one on the bottom shows back in 1843, within the same region, very close to today's earthquake, of an 8.5 magnitude earthquake striking out here, 40 kilometers deep. Now this whole area, very capable of producing some sizable earthquakes. It's, again, a major subduction zone that sits over here to the east. And on this map right here, doesn't quite show those blue little spikes, similar to a cold front that you would see on a weather model. But these are subduction zone symbols with a pointy blue there. Let me see if I can find that other model I was looking at. Okay, this one's a little bit better. It shows more of the troughs here, the Puerto Rico Trench, the Morotos Trough, a couple different subduction zones. It's kind of squeezing the Puerto Rico area, if you will. Notice that the arrows are pointing down towards Puerto Rico from the Puerto Rico Trench, and then up from the Morotos Trough towards Puerto Rico. So this area has always seen a swarm of activity due to that type of plate dynamic there. And the swarming has actually dropped off here over the past couple days. And now we're seeing all that movement kick up here to the east with that 6-pointer where the other major subduction zone sits. So there's a lot going on here around this plate boundary. It's always being shoved around by two major plates in the area. South America plate moving up to the north, kind of putting a squeeze on the Caribbean plate, and some activity up there on the North American plate. A whole lot. It's just you would not want to be the Caribbean plate if you decided to be a plate. Either way, a lot of activity there in that region historically. Now the swarming area has not come back yet, far as the Puerto Rico area. So I still think there's possibility we may be brewing something out here on the larger side. Let me see what we got for smaller quakes so far. Doesn't look like we're seeing any aftershock sequences there following that 6.2, which is rather odd. You would expect to see something kicking up here in this area, maybe some 2s, some 3s, some 4s, but doesn't show anything on the map there. So we'll continue to watch that region potentially for some larger scale activity. Again, that region very capable of seeing a mid 8-pointer at least. Now, Northern California did see a 4.3 just after midnight, 25 kilometers deep into the Cascadia subduction zone. Now, there's obviously some fault systems that run at the surface levels, but at 25 kilometers deep for this 4.3, that tells us that it's down dip underneath this land into the Cascadia subduction zone itself. We've been watching a swarm of activity here, I'd say over the last week or so. You can kind of call this aftershock activity, if you will, from the 6-pointer that struck here. I think it's been over a month now, if I remember right. Time seems to be all over the place recently. I don't know if anybody else has noticed that, but it seems like Friday was just yesterday, which is okay with me, right? Yes, I'm pretty certain we've seen a 6-pointer back there over 30 days ago. And so you can call this aftershock activity if you want to, but I technically don't because of the depth of this earthquake. Just showing some deep levels of earthquake activity within the Cascadia here. And it just tells me right there that there's a lot of strain built up here across the area of the southern end of the Cascadia. Now, the tremor activity last night kind of confirming that suspicion of regional pressure. All these little red dots here indicative of tremor down dip. Now, the down dip here, about 35, 45 kilometers below the surface level up here. So this is even about 10 kilometers deeper than the activity that we've been seeing upstream a little bit last night with a 4.3, and of course the other earthquakes throughout the last several days happening upstream. And that's obviously a sign of pressure increasing here in the area of the Cascadia and further subduction of the Juan de Fuca plate, creating the tremor. Right, you got to have subduction to have tremor. Tremor just doesn't happen out of the blue. Tremor occurs due to the slow slipping event of the two plates. Of course, on this model, it's going to be the North American plate here. Pacific. Let me see if I can. This one really doesn't show it. There's a bunch of different models, but right about here is the Pacific plate boundary and the North American plate boundary. Now up here you have the Juan de Fuca plate or the Gorda plate. It's a very small microquake that pretty much cuts off right about here. Very small microplate being shoved underneath a portion of the North American plate. And then up here you got the Juan de Fuca plate also being shoved underneath the North American plate, and the Explorer plate up here. But a lot of people, to avoid any confusion, just call this entire little plate here the Juan de Fuca plate. And that is being shoved underneath the North American plate slowly. Last earthquake was a 9.0 at least, back in 1700. Created a Pacific-wide tsunami. And no doubt it is building up for the next one. Again, when that will be, who knows? But the tremor activity kind of gives us a key indicator of what's going on up there or down there into the subduction levels. Higher tremor amounts, I believe there's a higher likelihood of seeing earthquake activity. And it's been following that pattern with tremor activity, kind of been confined here to Northern California over the last couple days. Not a whole lot, but definitely a noticeable increase, and therefore noticeable increase in activity upstream at the closer to the locked area, just like we've seen here overnight with a 4.3 and a couple other earthquakes this morning as well, 2.1, 2.0. All this earthquake activity down there, about anywhere between 19 and 26 kilometers or so above the tremor area. Down dip tremor, higher increasing in strain and pressure up along the subduction levels. So, got to watch that. Also, one earthquake way up here. It's kind of an odd one. I don't recall the USGS putting 1-pointers out here, but they are. Coming in this morning, a 1.4, just off of the Explorer plate, portion of the Juan de Fuca plate here as a whole, onto the Pacific side of the plate boundary, 25 kilometers deep. Rather odd earthquake. It's very odd. All right, so what's going on with the rest of Northern California? It's been fairly active in terms of West Coast movement along the plate boundary, even down south, outside of San Francisco, down off of Redwood City area, seen a 2.6 and a 2.9 yesterday. Late last night, though. Also up here, just off the Cloverdale area and the Macama Fault Zone, seen some activity as well with that 3.6 yesterday afternoon. Generally speaking, the plate dynamics here is, let me show you guys here the plates. You got the North American plate here, California, kind of scooting off to the northeast, right, along this plate boundary. Generally, as a whole, the North American plate, with the arrows kind of doing a kind of a little counterclockwise direction there. But North American plate boundary right here, moving to the southeast. The Pacific plate moving to the northwest there. Who was it that said Los Angeles will probably be very close to San Francisco in the years to come? Not any of our lifetimes or our kids, but way into the future due to that plate boundary motion. Now, the smaller activity that we've seen yesterday would make sense for that line of activity working its way northward towards the Cascadia. Kind of started out southern portion, working its way up northward here with that general plate movement kind of putting strain up along this area. So we might want to watch the Northern California area for possible further movement considering all this activity here yesterday. Kind of makes sense. Even the smaller earthquakes are more numerous today and overnight into portions of Northern California. So we can't discredit that. You can't just throw up the 2.5 map and say, wow, California is awfully quiet. We only had 7 earthquakes. Well, those are 2.5 and above. These smaller ones paint a picture of what's going on regionally with all the stress and whatnot along the plates and different fault systems. So California, you can say they've had 106 earthquakes within the last 24 hours. And most of that activity appears to be north of the creeping segment here, northward, and just follow this little trend of stress up into the Cascadia subduction zone. Definitely pretty active there today and overnight. Now, Southern California has been the quiet zone. You know, we can see it here on the map. Just kind of comes to a halt, and sometimes that does happen. And I think what is at play here is the Garlock Fault shear zone. Kind of puts a little damper on some pressure gradients that make its way northward from this plate boundary. That's why I think this Garlock Fault zone is a little bit more hazardous, and folks tend to, view it as. But we'll get to that in another time. We covered that quite a bit, the Garlock Fault shear zone. Now, interior Northern California, fairly quiet. One earthquake up here outside of the Hebgen Lake Estates, 0.9. That is, though, within the Yellowstone area. Let's give a quick glance here at the Yellowstone thumbnails and see what we have from a really cool site that utilizes all of the seismographs and kind of puts them out in a layout across the this little map here for us to view in simple terms. The Yellowstone area, of course, this whole map, and then you got the Yellowstone caldera, supervolcano, by the way. A lot of folks still don't know that's a supervolcano. It's definitely a lot more dangerous than a couple geysers and some wildlife out there. So far as earthquake activity goes, there's the significant 6-pointer that we've seen. Remember, down here into the area of Barbuda, 6.2 coming in, 3:23 a.m. That showed up fairly nicely across a good portion of the park. And if you look at the map here, it does take the... well, this actually kind of looks like it's off a little bit here with the time frame. I wonder what I'm missing. That says 3:23. That could have something to do with the different time zones, but it's definitely within that region. So here it would be about 4:23 UTC time, right? That's what I'm missing. I'm looking at the wrong one. UTC time is going to be over here at 11:23. There we go. I'm still not 100% back to normal, folks. I was down pretty much all day yesterday with body aches and pains in my head and random pains in my rib cage. No fever, but I kind of kept that at bay with some ibuprofen. But 11:23 UTC time, that would make sense. 11:30, and of course it does take a little bit of time for that seismic wave to travel across the surface and through the surface at times. The S wave kicking up there on that seismograph. Pretty nice, though. Definitely showed up rather strong. As far as local seismic activity goes, have we seen an increase in Yellowstone activity? I wouldn't say so. Things are somewhat still calm. Couple small earthquakes here over the last 24 hours, but nothing major going on across the board there at Yellowstone. Same for about the rest of the country and the states. A couple small earthquakes in the southern plains, western Texas as well. Now down here in the South America region, you could say, wow, that's awfully quiet. You know, those guys are not dealing with any earthquakes. But there's definitely a handful of little earthquakes down there overnight. And yesterday it looks like some 3s and 2s. Now remember, USGS does not show anything above 4.0 on their USGS map. So this is from the EMSC model, which shows the smaller earthquakes. Middle America Trench awfully quiet for now. Now the rest of the globe still seeing some activity ramping up here big time across portions of the Java Trench and the Molucca Sea region north of the Banda Sea. Southern end of the Philippines, all rocking and rolling, and we're still lacking this. See this little seismic gap here, in between about mid Himalayas, down to the northern end of the Java Trench. In this case, probably about mid northern end of the Java Trench. We're still missing activity here, and it's been backfilling. Of course, we've had cluster of quakes here, Java Trench eastward, and a little bit of activity looks like in portions of, let's see exactly where that's at today, north of the Himalayas into China, seen some activity, some fours, and also some activity in Tajikistan, one of the two. I keep forgetting which one's the correct one. Missy Mimi's ain't here to help correct me on that. But a little bit of activity kind of working its way, trying to fill in that seismic gap. But it's been awfully, I don't know if the word I can use, gappy. We've had that seismic gap for a little while now. And that kind of makes me think that something much bigger is brewing for this area. And this zone is no stranger to large earthquakes. So as long as we continue to see all this activity ramping up here east of our seismic gap zone, and a little bit of activity filling up further west of this gap zone, I think that puts us right in the prime spot of some larger activity. So that's definitely something to watch there pretty closely. As far as this activity around the Philippines area, now, of course, we did have that larger earthquake here. Let's go over here and see where it's at. 7-pointer that came in a couple days ago. Still seeing some aftershock activity in this area, quite a bit actually. Today we've seen quite a few 4s and a 5-pointer near the Molucca Sea. Even one earthquake upstream here of the, it's kind of the very southern end of the Philippine Trench. Indonesia region just north here. So activity still kind of hammering in this area fairly nicely. Now upstream, up towards Taiwan and areas northward, doesn't look like there's a whole lot popping up here around the northwest corner of the Philippine Plate. Things are awfully quiet there as well. A little bit of activity off the coast of Japan. Looks like a 5.0 and a 4.3. USGS reporting a 5.0, but not the 4.3. Okay. Either way, a little bit of an increase in activity out here, and I think that will stay that way, with bouncing back and forth type fashion between the North American Pacific Plate boundary and also this plate boundary here, until we see some further westward pressure movement. And that all makes sense too, because generally speaking, we follow that westward pressure activity around the bend in this region, and right now it's kind of halted here, northern Java Trench area into the Himalayas. So we'll keep an eye on that and see how this plays out. Big Island, Hawaii, most of the activity there around Pahala. No major changes noted there across the Big Island down into the Samoa area. Tonga, Kermadec Trench, one earthquake here, 5.4 Kermadec Trench area. Previous earthquake from last night, 4.9 up north. Now the GeoNet servers, let's see what we got here. Looks like a 3.6, pretty recent earthquake there, North Island, New Zealand. And, well, let's go ahead and go check that out here, GeoNet, real quick, and see what we have across the area. Make sure we got the most recent earthquake map here from these folks. And a couple ones, well, there's a 3.7. That appears to be about the only larger one listed up there on the globe and on the map here. Quite a few 2s, but that's almost always common for the New Zealand area. It sits along a major plate boundary down here, a major subduction zone. Got the Hikurangi subduction zone, the Alpine fault system that runs here through the South Island area, and of course the Kermadec Trench, Tonga Trench plays a major part in building up quite a bit of strain for some large quakes. But for now, just a little bit of minimal activity in that region. What do we got here in California right now? See, it's still kind of lighting up a little bit. 2.2 coming in just off the coast fault system right here. Kind of a lengthy one that runs offshore and inland. Looks like it may be connected to the oceanic fault, fault zone. 5.9 kilometers deep for a 2.2. Still showing activity out here along the west coast. All right, space weather activity here as we go to the sun. A little bit different story, but still pretty active here across the region of the sunspots. Now, these sunspots are about ready to say goodbye. They are rotating and drifting fairly rapidly towards the western edge of the sun, and they will be gone before we know it. And what's left behind it is not a whole lot, clear skies, so to speak, in terms of solar sunspots. Now, if these things want to do anything, they better do it now. 10% chance of an X flare, M flare at 60, 99% certainty for a C flare. We really haven't seen anything elevated here over the last 24 hours. Stayed well below the M flare category threshold here, that line, mostly crackling with C flares. Looking at the magnetic structure of these things, definitely look like they are decaying, unfortunately. And it always seems to happen that way. All of our larger flares have been way over here on either the eastern limb, or sometimes we get some on the far side of the sun. And whenever they're all facing Earth, it seems like we have a shield or something that prevents these from popping up, and creating some massive flares. No major changes expected across the 3-day geomagnetic forecast. Therefore, the Aurora watchers are not going to be in for much of a treat over the next few nights, and it will stay that way unless we get some major activity heading this direction. All right, folks, have a good day. Have a good Friday. We'll catch you guys back here a little bit later on tonight with the update video here on this Friday night coming up. The weekend already upon us. Amazing. All righty. Have a good one, guys. We'll catch you a little bit later on. Take care.